Welcome to chess, ladies and gentlemen. Malika Young Park diving inside my chest, ladies and gentlemen. Appreciate everybody for stopping by very much. I'm a day late, I know, but I do have the game from round 8 from the Sinquefield Cup between Maxime Vachier-Lagrave and Wesley. So, highly anticipated game. As of right now, Maxime Vachier-Lagrave is leading the tournament. Wesley So is tied for, I think, like second or third. So he's kind of down in the pack just a touch. So all of these remaining games pretty much determine who wins the tournament, but then also who wins the Grand Chess Tour outright. And right now, Wesley So is leading. So kind of depends on where he gets and sits. Today, so Wesley So is playing Leonardo Dominguez Perez. So you got to see how that game is going. But for all my people in the Philippines, I will say mabuhay to you. Masaya komakiri kay muli. Maraming salamat po sa nanonood ng aking mga video. Hello, you lit. Magandang hapon. Kumusta na aking mga kaibigan? It's good to see everybody again. Appreciate you guys very much. For anybody who is coming from France or who does speak French, I will say bonjour to you. Bon petit déjeuner. Merci beaucoup, mes amis. Ça me fait plaisir de te voir, mes amis. Appreciate you guys very much for stopping by. It's nice to see everybody again. If you guys are ready to go, I don't know why that's so big. If you guys are ready to go, let's take a look and see what we have for this game. So we got e4, e5, knight comes to f3, knight to c6, bishop to b5, knight to f6. And so we do have the Roy López, and it is the Berlin defense. Very solid. This is very often used. So I know what you guys are thinking. This is often very much used as a drawing weapon as black to try to just play, you know, a draw. But we will see in this game that we are not going for a draw. So neither player is trying to go for a draw in this game. I think at the end of the day, both players mentioned they were just trying to play as solid as possible. So, I mean, you know, both sides are very solid in these types of openings. So, we got castles by white. Knight takes on e4, of course, and then we see rook to e1. Knight comes to d6. This is all very standard stuff. Knight takes e5. Bishop to e7. Of course, as I always say, you're not going to be, you know, capturing this bishop because you're going to be looking at this, and that's a oops. So we do see bishop to e7. Bishop comes back down to f1. Knight takes e5. Rook takes e5. We got castles. This is all like standard stuff, been seen so many times. Knight comes to c3, so it's a little slight, you know, variation difference. We see knight up to e8. We got d4. Like d4 is literally always going to be there. Bishop comes to f6. We want to get a little tempo on this rook. So the rook comes back down to e1. We got d5, and we see b3. And this is not a variation that I've ever shown before in a game. So this lets you know right now that's like, hey, I don't want to draw. So neither player are wanting to draw this game. They're just playing solid, but as you can see, you know, Maxime Vachier-Lagrave, he did try to come up with something new to play. So we fighting right now. And so we got c6, and then we see bishop to a3. And of course, as of the moment, you know, the rook is attacked. So knight to d6 is going to be the only way you can defend the rook. And then we have queen to f3, which is the novelty of the game. So it's the first time that this has been seen. So Maxime, you know, he came up with a couple, like, you know, little nuances in the position. You know, you got the b3, you know, bishop to a3 attacking the rook, and you got queen to f3. So as you can see, Maxime says, hey, man, I want to win. And, you know, Wesley So does too. Bishop comes to e6. And this is one of the top moves. There are two main moves in a position. Bishop to e6 is one of them. And knight comes to f5 is just maybe slightly better. But we're talking about like a tenth of a pawn's worth better. Like, they're pretty interchangeable moves. So, like I said, we saw bishop to e6 in the game. But if we go off on this knight to f5 tangent, there's something I wanted to show you guys. And this is what they were talking about a lot. Anybody who saw the broadcast and we're watching Yasser Serouan, Alejandro Ramirez, and Maurice Ashley. This is like some lines that Maurice was like coming up with, and it was crazy. So after knight comes to f5, you know, of course you're going to win the exchange by taking, you know, bishop takes f8. And then knight is going to be taking d4. And it was in this position that that Maurice Ashley was like, hey, man, there's some crazy line that I looked at and I found. Queen takes f6. You're like, man. Okay, so my question to you is, this is actually against the move section, right? What I want you guys to do right here is pause the video and see what black plays in this position. So basically, it's a two option thing. Do you take with the queen or do you take with the pawn? So if you want to pause the video and try to guess between those two moves, go ahead and do so. Okay, so just to let you guys know, this is very, very good for black. This is almost like 2 pawns worth of an advantage for black. But it depends on how you capture back. I think a lot of people out there, even probably if I was to look at it, even myself, possibly, I would be looking at the fact that it's like, man, I don't want to take with the pawn because my structure is going to be damaged and stuff. Like, you know, I'm so far ahead. Let me take with the queen, right? So basically what white is trying to do by doing this move, queen takes f6, is they're hoping that black thinks that way. Because the best possible move by far is pawn takes g6. So if you guessed queen takes g6, this is actually a game-losing blunder, even though you have a queen. And I'll show you exactly why. So it's weird because at this particular point, you have to do the atypical capture back. So if you guess pawn takes f6, then you would be absolutely correct. If you chose queen takes f6, I'm sorry, but you're losing the game. And I'll show you exactly why. Like I said, pawn takes f6. And you would see something like, you know, bishop to e7, but I mean, the queen can just literally come anywhere, even come here and just place an attack on this knight. This is not completely, I mean, you have options. I mean, and this bishop is going to be coming out. So you really just kind of gave your queen away, ultimately. I mean, you know, black, you know, they got a little, you know, yeah, I mean, you just gave your queen away, basically. So going back to what we had, to what you know, some people might possibly do after queen takes f6. If you took back with the queen in this particular case, yes, you're preserving your structure, but you're looking at rook to e8. And this is just like losing on the spot. Because, I mean, you have to create some type of look for your king, but the problem is there's really no good way to prevent this discovery check. You can't move this bishop anywhere ever because this rook is going to be hanging, and it just literally just maintains the pin and the discovery possibility. And like I said, I mean, the best possible move that the computer gives is h5. But unfortunately, this is going to be dropping, you know, the queen to this, and the king's going to come over here, and you're going to do this. And I mean, you're literally just down an entire piece. You have a pawn, but that you're down in exchange, and it's not where you're trying to be at, man. So that is the consequence of actually trying to preserve your pawn structure in that position. So what you have to think about is when your opponent is sacrificing material, like you don't always put, like, you know, your thoughts of like preserving your structure and things like that aside, but those are usually situations where you can make exceptions to the rules. So definitely consider all different types of possibilities. So that's something you take away from that. But like I said, we had bishop to e6, queen came to f4, of course attacking the knight twice, so we defended. Bishop to e7, we got bishop to d3. So, you know, both sides are pretty much done, you know, what they need to do. They got, you know, into, like, you know, the good position and stuff. Knight comes back to e8. You know, we're just making sure that we protect this pawn. And, you know, also getting the knight away from, you know, the attacks that it was under. So bishop takes e7, queen takes e7. We got rook up to e5. So we just really just putting that rook just right, you know, in the middle of the board. We got g6. You know, and the thing about g6 is you don't have to worry about dark square weaknesses as much because white doesn't have a dark square bishop. It's not like you don't have to worry about them at all because there is still a knight on the board that might be able to kind of like influence, maybe do something like this, or, you know, like maybe come do something like this, or, you know, just try to land on g5 somehow or something like that and threaten this pawn or something like that. But, you know, without a bishop on the board that's a dark square bishop, I mean, you definitely have a lot less to worry about. We got rook a to e1. We see knight to g7. Knight comes down to e2. We see rook a to e8. Knight comes to g3. We see queen to d6, which is kind of like pinning this, but I mean, you definitely do have rook to e4. And this queen is also undefended, so it's not that crazy of a pin. We see queen up to f6. Queen comes back to d8. And so we got queen taking d8, rook taking d8. We got h4. Rook f to e8. We got h5. And this is kind of cute. You know what I'm saying? Like, you definitely don't want to take here with the knight because you're going to be taken back. And, you know, the rook is going to be taken back. And you kind of have a little bit of pressure on his pawn. So, I mean, you know, it's a little something, something. We got f6 knocking the rook because we don't like the rook being there protecting like that. Rook 5 goes to e3. And then you still have to be careful because you don't want to move this knight because it is holding down this bishop. We see bishop up to f7. Pawn takes g6. Pawn takes g6. Rook takes e8 with check. Rook takes e8. Rook takes e8 with check. Knight takes e8. You see f3. Knight comes down to d6. You got king to f2. King to g7. King to e3. Bishop to e6. You got knight down to e2. g5. And then you have g4. And this is a position that I actually wanted to talk about a certain concept of the game that I realized I even mentioned before, but I've never really gone in depth and talked about it before. And that is what's called space. Pretty much anybody who's played the game, even to, you know, low level, high level, whoever, you know, you've heard people mention space. And some of you guys might not know what space is even talking about. I mean, you understand, like, okay, space is like a bunch of space and stuff. But, like, what does it have to do specifically to the game of chess, right? Okay, so to basically show you guys exactly what people mean when they mention space in chess, it's basically the amount of squares or space you control or attack in your opponent's position. So showing you guys exactly what I mean by that. If we take, for example, that this is black side of the board, and then we take, for example, this is white side of the board. Basically, what you're looking at is what are all of the different squares or space does white attack in black's position. So we have to do a count. Sometimes you can visualize it pretty quickly, depending on your experience level. Sometimes, you know, you have to do a count. So if we do a count, we try to think from this rank up into black's position. You know, what are all the squares that white attacks? So we have this pawn that's attacking or defending these two squares. So we have 2. This pawn is doing the same thing into black's position. And this bishop is actually attacking these 2 squares. And then this bishop is also attacking these 3 squares. So if we do this, what's called the space count, we will see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So out of all of the pieces that white has in their position, the only pieces that are influencing black side of the board are this pawn, and this bishop, right? So white has a space count of 9 at the moment. And then if we do the same thing for black, we're basically looking for anything that's past this and down, right, in white's position. So we have this pawn that's attacking these 2 squares. We have this pawn that's attacking these 2 squares. We also have this knight that's attacking these 2 squares. And this bishop is actually just attacking this 1 square. You know, because, you know, you guys see that this is all black side of the board. So, you know, all right. So we have actually for black a space count of 7. And you guys are some of you guys, most of you guys, I think, are familiar with like the basic fundamentals, you know, the elements of the game and stuff like that. So, you know, we're talking about like king safety. We're talking about material development, space and tempo, stuff like that. So, you know, in the beginning of the game, and, you know, you're trying to develop your pieces. You're trying to get your king into safety. You know, you're trying to make sure that you don't waste a bunch of tempo with all these different moves. You know, of course, there's material. So these are all different things that you consider in a position to try to see, like, who's doing better, whose king is safer, who has more material. Of course, if you're down a pawn or 2, I mean, you know, you have a material disadvantage, right? So those are just different concepts. So space is one of those things. Just because you have more space doesn't necessarily mean you're winning the game. It can definitely help because whoever has more space has more movability, like maneuverability, you know what I'm saying? So we actually see the next move is f5 by black. So the interesting thing about this is this considerably changes the space count, because you guys remember before this bishop was, you know, going into this territory. Whenever you have an opponent's piece in the position, it changes the space count because you have to now stop at that piece. So before, like I said, we have these 3 squares that this bishop is influencing, right? With the move f5, it reduces the amount of, you know, influence this bishop has by 2. Now this bishop is no longer influencing these squares. So now we have a different space count. So like I said, it's not like one side is winning way more than the other because they have more space. But this is just one of the considerations that these level players, these super grandmasters, I mean, even just your average player is going to be considering when they're thinking of like what moves to make and, like, you know, kind of what they're going to do. So that was long-winded, but I just thought it would be interesting because, I mean, I've made like 400 and something videos now, I think, somewhere in there, 375, 400. And I just realized that I never really fully explained exactly what space was. I've used the term a lot of times. And I mean, it's pretty general, but I mean, that's something specific that, we learn as chess players when you get to a certain level. So we do have F4. I'm going to run through these moves pretty quick. We got king to F6, pawn takes G5 with check, king takes G5, pawn takes G5, bishop takes G5. We got C4, bishop takes D3, and that allows the king to come over to protect C4. Pawn takes C4 with check, pawn takes C4. We got king over to F5. Knight comes to C3. We see king to E6. We got A4. You're really just trying to like restrict black as much as possible. We see B6, A5, pawn takes A5, D5 with check, pawn takes D5, and knight takes D5, knight takes C4, king takes C4. We got A4, knight to F4 with check, king comes to F5, king goes to B4. We got A5 with check, attacking the king. King takes A4, king takes F4, king takes A5. And you guys saw a while ago that white did not have a way to checkmate black because, they just only had a knight. So, I mean, at this point, a lot of you guys realized it was a draw. But playing it out further, you guys obviously see that two kings dancing around the board is a draw. So, I didn't anticipate the video being this long. It's not crazy long, but I did want to get into explaining that concept of space because maybe some of you guys were not familiar. It's not the deepest concept ever, but it's definitely something that is not just automatically known on the surface. Like, I mean, you can imagine that somebody has more space, but how do you kind of calculate it and figure it out? How do you play, it into like you actually making moves and considering moves? So, yes, of course, also there are tactics. I mean, there's all kinds of different criteria. But I appreciate you guys very much. Merming salamat, a king makai bigan. Merci beaucoup to my people in France. And I'll see you guys next time.